This is the Fascia Fix, with Nellen and Justin Kroll, exploring the body's most overlooked system to find healing from chronic pain and trauma. They're here to educate and empower you through fascia science, real stories, and self-healing tools. So, tune in, open your mind, and let's fix what's been broken.
Welcome to the very first episode of the Fascia Fix. We're your hosts. I'm Nellen.
And I'm Justin, and we're physical therapists from a city called Mississauga, just a little bit outside of Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
So we are officially your new favorite Canadians, or maybe your new Canadian besties. And one of the things that we're going to do throughout this show is talk about fascia and how it relates to health and how important it is to the basis of all healthcare, in our opinion. But the other thing we're going to do is say some things that are very historically Canadian.
Yeah, you may hear us saying, I'm sorry, or apologizing. You might hear us say a lot of aboots instead of about. And you know what? I don't hear it sometimes. I've had American colleagues tell me that they hear it in my voice, but we'll do our best.
Yes, sorry, not sorry. But from a fascial perspective, we also want to honor the fact that that word is said a little bit differently for our neighbors to the south in the United States. They sometimes say fascia. We're going to use the word fascia, but just understand that it is interchangeable and you can use it either way.
Mm-hmm. Now, why should you care about that word? What is fascia? Why does it matter? Why am I listening to this program? Well, we're going to give you some answers to that question today. We have a fantastic guest who's going to give us a great word picture for what is actually going on in a living body from an energetic perspective to the physical perspective and why it matters at all.
But first, you probably want to know a little bit about who we are. So we mentioned that we're physical therapists. We're also married and co-own a practice together in Mississauga, and it's called, what do you know? Myofascialrelief Mississauga.
Mm-hmm.
We opened that practice back in the beginning of 2020, in January of 2020, which was an interesting time shortly thereafter. But this idea of incorporating myofascial release into our treatment started long before that with you, Justin.
Absolutely. I had a clinical placement at the end of my program that really shaped the rest of my career. And honestly, it plays into the conversation we're going to be having later today.
Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting from as someone who's been trained as a physical therapist, understanding what this is about, it really shifted the mindset of how we treat our clients. And so we want to share a little bit of that with you today and see if maybe you can see what we see to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's introduce our very first guest who we're so excited to have on the show for our first episode. Her name is Dr. Carol Davis, and she is a physical therapist and professor at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine in the Department of Physical Therapy. She's also a manual therapist in clinical practice herself, primarily treating patients with cervical and lumbar spine pain using the John Barnes myofascial release method. Dr. Davis is also an international lecturer and consultant, a respected author, and the author of many published peer-reviewed journals. Her book, Integrative Therapies in Rehabilitation, has been a staple on the shelf of our own clinic library and in our brains for quite a number of years. And she uses this material to also teach a number of her peers, physical therapists like ourselves, around the country with this special interest of myofascial release. And that's how you met her initially, right?
That's absolutely right. It was a working group research presentation day through our program that I met her, would have been about 10 to 12 years ago. I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're excited to get into this conversation. So welcome, Dr. Davis.
My pleasure. It's nice to be here. It's good to see you again, Justin, and to meet you, Nellen.
So I'm really excited about this conversation. Mm-hmm. Plus, she's just one of the smartest people I've ever heard speak.
Absolutely. I always feel smarter after talking to her. So this will be a great fun for everyone listening too, I'm sure.
All right. So since our listeners don't know you like we do, Dr. Davis, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in physical therapy and what led you to your work in John Barnes myofascial release?
Well, I started in physical therapy a long time ago. I graduated from the first entry-level master's program at Case Western Reserve in 1969, and I started my career at the Mass General Hospital. I recognized that some of the things that I learned in physical therapy school, even then, so long ago, didn't make good sense to me. They didn't follow what I understood to be physical function,
Mhm.
learning exercises in cardinal planes, and I stumbled on a Swiss physical therapist at Mass General using proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation
Mhm.
as a treatment technique, and I watched her and I thought that's the kind of physical therapy I want to do. And so I studied PNF with Dorothy Voss, and got very interested in patients with neurological disorders. And I really focused on that for about 25 years, treating patients with neurological disorders with PNF, and also focused on clinical education, teaching students at the bedside about effective interaction skills. I always recognized the importance of the connection between the therapist and the patient, and how important it was to make that rapport, that link. And I was fascinated by that. And always in my mind's eye, I wondered, if there were a camera that could video a really soulful interaction, a good rapport interaction with a patient. I wonder if you could see something of one person going over to the other person and coming back, that energetic link. And I did have that energetic link also with my twin sister. We had what's known as ESP. So we were in some studies that showed that our brains were linked, and fun stuff. We bought the same coat on the same day in two different cities. And we were in a study where she was in a hallway down, a room down the hall from me at my university. And there was a platform with a light on it. And we were hooked up to a physiograph that measured our brain waves. And when you close your eyes, your brain wave changes. And when the light went on, the command was, when the light goes on, close your eyes and count to 10. Well, Sue's light went on, and she closed her eyes and she counted to 10, and her brainwave changed. My light did not go on. I did not count to 10. But my brainwave changed at the very same moment.
Wow.
And when I saw that that would be in 1965, I thought, there's something here that's very, very interesting about how we're connected. And I knew it had to do with quantum science because I was studying biology and chemistry, and nothing that I was studying in those subjects let me believe. And I knew enough about quantum, about non-local connection. And I thought, well, I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and learn this, I guess, because it seems so out of reach for me. And then in 1989, a colleague of mine at Miami said, have you taken any courses from this Barnes fellow? And I said, no. He said, why don't you he's in Fort Lauderdale, take a course from him, see what you think. I'd be interested in what you think. So I said, okay. I had been reading some of John's material in a little publication called Every Inch and a Half. It was just a newspaper put out by the people who made the compression stockings. And he would write about energy, and he would write about manual therapy and energy exchange. I thought, wow, that's really controversial. And he did start to get criticized a lot in physical therapy for being unscientific. But I signed up, and I went expecting to just, see for myself and be able to decide. Well, in that course, recognized this was what was missing in my practice. When I held the head of my partner and felt what we call the cranial rhythm at that time, and I recognized this energetic link between me and the person I was working with, I said, this is the piece. This is the piece. So I was really shocked at this discovery, and I became kind of frightened because in that moment, I happened to be on the editorial board of the journal. I was doing a lot of publication, and I was seen as a hard scientist contributor, and I knew if I got into this, I would probably be ridiculed as well. But there was no way of getting around it. This was really the missing link for me. And then I waited for 5 years, and then I went and started taking courses with him, and I changed my whole practice around following the principles that John Barnes teaches about fascia and biotensegrity. And that was in 1995. And then I started reading the science, trying to understand the science better, and actually took a leave of absence from the university in 93 and went to Sedona. He wasn't there yet. Well, he came on the 4th of July. I met him there in 93 just by accident. He was there, and he had plans to build this treatment center. And then he said to me, Carol, what are you going to do to move science forward in the next century?
What a question.
I said, I'd like to write a book, but I'm scared. He said, what are you afraid of? And I said, well, I think I'll probably be ostracized by the community. And he said, well, if you're worried about what other people think of you, you'll never have a happy life. So he says, you write that book and I'll open this treatment center. And in 1998, his treatment center opened. My book came out, the first edition of integrated therapies, or at the time it was complementary therapies and rehabilitation, including a chapter on myofascial release by John Barnes, but it had the fascia science in it. It had the scientific exploration of holistic therapies and what happens under our hands when we touch the skin and fascia.
Amazing. That's such an incredible story. And I love that it actually is very similar for a lot of myofascial release therapists. I think they have sort of a similar experience of going to their first course.
It changes your life. Yeah.
It does. I had actually that same experience of the cranial rhythm in my first course, and it blew me away even after having seen firsthand with Justin doing this therapy for years beforehand.
So, Carol, many of our listeners have heard the term fascia. It's floating around a lot on the internet and throughout the wellness industry in general. Can you paint us a picture of what fascia looks like in our bodies and why it's so topical in the world of health?
Oh my. Well, the picture for people who are visually oriented, please go on YouTube to Strolling Under the Skin by Jean-Claude Guimbarteau. And this is a 20-minute video of 10 times magnification on an endoscopic tube inserted under the skin to see living fascia in this web, this network, this fluid, watery web under the skin. And that is fascia, but fascia goes in one continuous tissue from the top of our head to the bottom of our feet. There are no interruptions. And this tissue itself forms the foundation of everything inside of us. It's liquid crystal, and what that means is that it's very responsive to pressure. And electrons are flowing, subtle energy electrons and photons and protons, so subatomic particles are flowing through this tissue into cells and out of cells. Every one of our 28 to 36 trillion cells are embedded within the fascia, very much like the thread of an embroidery is embedded in the cloth. The cell can't work without the fascia and the cell work together. The heart fascia works with the heart, the muscle fascia works with the muscle, the lungs, the brain, the skin, the bladder, the digestive system, all tissue works with the fascia connection in order to be able to function. So it's critical. It's the foundation of all of life, not just in human beings, but in many, many living organisms. That's a rough picture of it, but it really is. It's a crystalline web. James Oshman defines it. I have it written right here: semiconducting liquid crystal matrix, which stores and processes vast amounts of subliminal or non-neural information. That means fascia has information in it. Not just the nervous system is giving our cells information, but fascia itself is giving our cells information. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of definitions of fascia.
Yes.
But the one that I like the best is one that I came up with my AI friend on ChatGPT. Fascia seems to serve as a threshold where light, all energy on our planet comes from the sun, where light becomes life, where the infinite speed of intention meets the slow pulse of embodiment. That takes the idea that when we are touching someone, we are transmitting energy from our system through our hands, through infrared energy, into the system of the person that we're working with. And the fascia of that system resonates with ours. And so we have this connection that could be very similar to that connection that I have with my twin sister that the EEG was picking up back in 1965. There is a knowing that takes place, a resonance that takes place that is hypothesized to be foundational to the healing process. Now, some of this is still hypothetical. We can't measure all of it. We measure the effects of it, but we can't see it happening. And so there are people who say, there's no such thing as subatomic particles moving through fascia. And yet the research of Donald Ingber, for example, in the early 1990s, when he described mechanotransduction, the transmission of infrared energy through our hands, through the piezo receptors in the skin, down through the fascia. The piezo receptors are fascial cells, into the interoceptive nervous system, up to the brain, so that you can see that fascia is using the concept of subatomic particles moving through it to inform us in our sensory nervous system about the world around us.
Absolutely. Yes. That was a really, really good description. Very thorough. I like what your new definition is. It's very mindful. And I think, for anybody who's listening, who's maybe not super science minded, essentially what we're saying, what Carol is saying, is that the fascia is a bit like an information highway, that it transmits signals faster than our nervous system can and more subtly. Specifically when we're talking about, as therapists, putting our hands on a client, that exchange of energy, it's not just this like woo-woo thing out there. Right. Our bodies, our therapists' hands and our patients' bodies can sense that energy exchange, like you said, through infrared energy and through that mechanotransduction, that pressure energy.
That's right.
And with the sustained pressure of myofascial release specifically, allowing over time that ability for the body to drop in and feel those spaces as that opening occurs. So you get this connection to parts of yourself that feel like maybe you haven't been home in a long time.
Right. The therapist can help that by saying, feel where my hands are. Bring your attention down to where my hands are and feel what's happening, because you can feel fascia starting to unwind under the hands of the therapist if the patient brings their attention to it. Some patients can't feel it, but many, many patients can.
Yeah, you're right. I'm curious, in your time as a treating therapist, as a physical therapist, and as a myofascial release therapist, what is the biggest misconception that you hear either from your colleagues or from patients about fascia?
That it's connective tissue, that it just connects things,
Yep.
and that it's packing material. It's what it's what wraps the organs.
Yes.
Yeah.
We hear that one a lot.
Along that
And-
same line, when we were having a conversation last week in preparation for this interview, you told us this great story about how the fascial system starts affecting the body and its development right from inception, and the idea of the cells replicating rather than dividing. Briefly, are you comfortable with sharing that story with us a little bit?
Yes, for sure. And this is the work of Jaap van der Wal, Yaap Vanderwal, Jaap van der Wal, who is a phenomenologist, a physician, and an embryologist. And Jaap has studied what happens from the moment of conception with the development of the embryo into a fetus, into a zygote, and then into a fetus. And of course, we know that the egg is available to sperm, and when the sperm comes swimming toward the ovum at the moment of conception chooses one sperm and puts out a light. This has been measured, a zinc light that accepts one sperm and kills off all the rest of them. And at the moment that the sperm and the egg unite, at the moment of conception, this flash of light has been recorded. And the DNA and the energy in the sperm and the DNA and the energy in the egg come together and unite, and then you have a fertilized egg, which then multiplies into two. Now, it doesn't divide, because it's not half of one and half of another, unless you're twins, and we won't go into that. But it multiplies. In other words, there are two whole entities here, and then there are four whole entities, and then there are 8 whole entities, multiplying according to the blueprint of the DNA, but energized by this energy that comes in at the moment of conception that we understand to be biotensegrity energy, an energy field that's present in all living beings. And it goes into this zygote that then develops into an embryo through this, following the blueprint. It's like taking a book off a shelf and reading the manual, but the actual unfolding of the living being, cells are energized by what we call biotensegrity energy. And then the fetus takes shape over into an embryo, and an embryo takes place into a fetus and grows in the womb to 9 months, and then is ready to be delivered.
And that whole idea of each cell multiplying into another entity,
Yes,
that is really the beautiful piece about it, and a really great way to describe it, because now we're talking about kind of the idea of like stem cells, right?
yes.
And you had mentioned something before when we were chatting before about the idea of stem cells working in one organ, let's say for the pancreas, I think you mentioned, and trying to like regrow part of the pancreas, and why that works and doesn't work, and what fascia has to do with that.
Yeah, this was Dan Mills, my dear friend, who was a physician who was doing diabetes research at the university, and I was treating him, and he told me a story. I said, fascia can't be separated from any of your cells. And he said, well, that answers a question for me. I said, what's that? He says, I was taking stem cells from the liver and putting them in a petri dish to try to develop them into cells to insert into the pancreas for people with diabetes. And I would try to clean off the cells, the embryonic cells, of all their fascia so that I could just get a clean cell. and the cells wouldn't grow. In the Petri dish, and one day I got so frustrated, I just threw the whole mess in with the fascia and all, and they grew. And I said, yeah, the cells, the stem cells need the fascia. But the thing is, you see, here's the special realization that I don't think people understand. This happens at the moment of conception, but we keep on self-organizing and self-regulating ourselves. Cells die off, new cells are formed. We get a new essence of ourself about every 7 years. The only cells that don't replicate themselves regularly are the cells in the lens of the eye. We die with the same cells in the lens of the eye that we were born with. And that's kind of why some people get cataracts, because they oxidize and they have to get a replacement. But and some cells in the brain, but not. We used to think the whole brain was what we were born with. No, cells are constantly being renewed, and in the brain as well. So, in one sense, from the moment of conception, we're self-organizing according to this blueprint and according to this energy, this biotensegral energy. We're self-replicating. We're self-discovering. We're all kinds of. We are a complex organizational system that keeps on organizing according to the rules of complex systems until the moment we take our last breath. And then, at the moment we take our last breath, once again, the light emerges, and we've recorded that now. In the light emerges from mitochondria, and then the mitochondria fade off, and then there's no more light. So from the moment of conception to the moment we take our last breath, light is energizing us. And where does this light come from? Of course, from the sun. Even though a lot of the time we're in the dark, we still have photons inside of us. They've grown sweet potatoes, and then they put the budding sweet potatoes in the dark, and they took those sweet potatoes and put them in the dark so that the second generation never saw the sun. They still had photons in their system.
Wow.
So we get photons, and there's some data that indicates that photons, and this is one of the chapters in my book, where does the missing energy come from? Because the energy for muscle contraction is only 3/4 of it is produced by the Krebs cycle and the cells in our body. There's about 1/4 of the energy that we weren't sure where it was coming from. And the speculation is it's actually coming from the photons in the body.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So get that sunshine, 15 minutes a day through the eyelids. The eyelids are great. Close your eyes. They're very thin, so the photons can come through your eyelids. Getting that fresh sunshine every day is so important.
Yep. Hear that, everyone? It's time to go outside and take a walk.
It's a little harder for those of us on the East Coast, where 6 months of the year it's very dark in the winter. But that's all right.
So you were mentioning your colleague who you were treating. If you're comfortable with getting practical with us, can you walk us through a common scenario? Maybe someone with back pain or stiffness it's in their shoulders, in their hips or pelvis. Explain how fascia might be the hidden culprit that traditionally treatments have been missing.
Sure. And this is such a frustrating point for physical therapists who sometimes have to practice under the direction of physicians who say, treat this neck pain, when we really know that the pain's coming from an anteriorly rotated pelvis. Because fascia goes in one continuous tissue from the top of the head to the bottom of the feet. If we have a pelvis that's rotated, that just is not sitting well under the shoulders, for example, and there's one side is down and the other side is up, that's going to pull on the fascia all the way up into the shoulder, into the neck. And so we can treat that neck pain, but if we don't correct that pelvic problem, we aren't going to be. They'll be back in 2 weeks. And so John Barnes put this together, and he said the pelvis very often is the center of a malalignment in the body, and since it's all connected, treat the pelvis first. take a look at, so when someone comes in, anybody comes in, the first thing I do is, well, I've washed my hands to get ready for the person, to leave the last person off and to get rid of the energy from the last person, that I'm starting anew. And I'm coming into my treatment area fresh. And I always ask, what brought you here today? Or how is today different than last time I saw you, if it's a repeating patient? And then I let them talk. And they tell me where they are in this moment in time, because as Barnes says, we're never the same moment to moment. I'm not the same as a therapist, and the patient's not the same. So we might, in the traditional physical therapy sense, well, I treated that last time, so now I'm going to move on to the next place in the algorithm. No, everybody is new every moment. And I ask them, what brought you here today? And then I listen very carefully. And then I watch them. I get them to stand up. I ask them to take their clothes off except for their underwear so I can see their skin. And I bring them up to the mirror. And I see where this is the high shoulder here, and maybe their thorax is rotated a little. Those are the places that fascia is pulling on the whole. And here I've got a tensegrity model here that you can see. This kind of represents, let's say, a whole human being. And if there's a rotation here, there's a rotation one place, the whole system is going to be involved. And so I look to see where the fascia is pulling in tension. And I think, oh, in gravity at least, it looks like to me that pelvis has a right anterior rotation that's affecting the way it sits underneath the ribs all the way up into the neck and shoulders. So then I think, well, that's maybe where I'm going to start. So I have him lie down on the table, and out of gravity, everything changes. I think, yes. Oh, now wait a minute. And so I very gently, I do the second level of preparation. The first level was coming into the room fresh and clean. The second level is approaching the patient, and the patient always, or the client always knows when you're approaching them into their energy field. And I may then just place my hands on the patient. But before I do that, I get out of my left brain. I remember what I saw analytically. I've kind of done my diagnostic evaluation. Now I approach and I get out of my left brain and I drop down into my body. There's a wonderful suggestion by Milton Traeger, who says, feel the weight of the air in the room on your body. So I direct my attention to the weight of the air. That gets me right out of my left brain. And I take a deep breath, and then I very, very gently place my hands both in, maybe over the ribs, or maybe one over the shoulder and one over the pelvis. And I let them sink in. And I'm then immediately connecting with fascia through the skin. And I feel what's happening under my hands. And I notice, for example, the thorax seems to be higher on one side than the other. And my other hand comes up, and I actually push the patient into that rotation. I do the closed door. You can pull and pull and pull and pull and pull on a stuck drawer. But if you push on the stuck drawer and then you pull, that's called the indirect approach. So I do an indirect approach. If their right shoulder's up, I actually push them down a little bit farther, and then feel again. And I'm asking the whole time to the fascia. I'm in conversation with fascia. What do you need? What's happening? Where's the tightness? Where's the pull? And I wait, and pretty soon my hands will sink in. John says that's the real connection. That's when you're at the barrier, and you're at the fascial barrier, and you wait. You wait there for 5 minutes. You wait, and you think, oh, such a long time, 5 minutes. Not if you're listening. Not if you're listening to the fascia. What is it that you need? What's happening here? And my hands will start moving, and then after 3 to 5 minutes, then I won't lift my hands up. I'll just reverse, and then see if I can bring them back to the other side, see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And where is the resistance? Where's the pull? And then I see, oh, something's going on down there in that right pelvis, that right psoas area. And then I might say, I know you're feeling my hands on you. Do you feel this anywhere else? Oh yeah, right down in my hip, my right hip. So very often they will direct you right to where the fascia is talking to them too.
Yes.
And the whole treatment then proceeds in that manner. And then I get them up off the table. I always finish with a sphenoid lift. I'm up at the head and I have my fingers placed on the sphenoid. And I'm it's a little ritual I do. I'm giving thanks, actually. I'm giving thanks for the opportunity to practice this marvelous interpersonal interaction skill. And I'm feeling for the energetic flow in the sphenoid, the 7-Up bubbles. And I feel for the sphenoid to balance the sphenoid because all the fascia comes up and into this area. And then I ask them to, when they're ready, to stand up and let's take a look and see what happened. And I bring them back over to the mirror and I say, now, can you see any difference at all? Oh, yeah. I feel like I'm up over my hips. I really feel my feet are under me. And one person, and this was very, very early on in my practice, the dean of research at Miami, I was treating him for what he thought was a knee problem, but it was really a hip problem. And I released, and then I finished with a dural tube release, and he got up and he said, well, Carol, I expected you to help my hip to feel better. I didn't know it was or my knee to feel better. I didn't know it was a hip problem, but I never expected you to help me feel more at one with myself.
Wow.
He was a chemist.
Wow.
A hard scientist. But he was an enlightened person too. There are a lot of people who won't know what in the world I'm talking about when I say that. But the feedback over the last 30 years that I've been doing this is very consistent with patients. And I imagine you share this with me. Patients saying, why doesn't everybody do this? So that's how I would proceed to answer your question, Justin.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Carol. We definitely have had experiences like that. I know I have firsthand as a patient. And my number one sort of feeling that I tend to get is just a feeling of lightness. I remember distinctly thinking after a session one time, I was just walking home and it was like all the times I had done that walk before, like I was walking through molasses. And this time it felt like walking through air, like everyone should be. And it was such a profound shift for me.
Right.
Anybody who's ever been in that flow state, whether it's you're going for a run, you're gardening, you're just something where your mind is occupied and you're just in the flow of that movement, you've probably experienced this to some extent, right? It's that idea of just being in that moment, being fully present. And, to know that you can get there and feel even better there, that you can move smoothly without effort. It's huge.
I want to take a moment to quickly review what we sort of have established so far in our conversation.
All right.
So far, we've described the fascia as this interconnected web where it cannot be separated from its cells, a communication highway that is continuous from head to toe. And we've described how that energy that we put into the system can be sort of stored. And we've also talked about how we can apply that in practice. And I know from my discussions with other people in our lives and, even in, cocktail conversations when people ask what you do, saying all of this is a little bit challenging.
And they smile and nod politely, but they have no idea what you're talking about.
They do. But I by the end of the conversation, I usually hear something along the lines of, I've never heard somebody describe physical therapy like that before. And I explained to them that it's a piece of what we do as physical therapists, but it's not exactly conventional physiotherapy.
Right.
And one of the components of that I was hoping that you could shed a bit of light on, because you've been studying fascia for decades at this point,
Yeah.
I'd love if you could share a little bit about the idea of fascia as a container for emotional memory or trauma in the body, because this is definitely something that we see in our practice regularly.
Mm. Well, this is really the one of the controversial points. The people who study the body and the systems in the body, who are focused on the nervous and the importance of the nervous system, I call them neurocentrists, insist that all memory and all experience is a function solely of the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
But those of us who do fascial work have a hard time believing that there's not more to it than that.
Right.
For example, one of the most consistent times that I've experienced that is working with women who have cesarean scars, that have had emergency cesareans when they were under a lot of trauma. And as I'm working with the scar, the emotion comes up. Now, I'm not anywhere near the central nervous system. I am in the peripheral nervous system for sure, because the sensory nerves are picking this up. But the concept that there's something about memory that is in the tissue itself, in the moment that something happens. Now,
Yes.
obviously, this tissue was cut into in an emergency situation with a scalpel. That is a tissue injury. But there are also trauma experiences where there is no actual cutting into the tissue, a shock or a fall out of a tree, or an automobile accident, a rollover automobile accident, where energy is forced on the person, kinetic energy is forced on the person, and it goes into the body. And the fascia then takes that energy, sends it up to the brain to make sense out of it. The idea is that there are components of the continuous tissue of fascia that hold on to energetic elements of that remain, and that are accessible only through manual therapy or through movement therapy, not accessible just through talk therapy. So the fascinating thing about the brain is that every single thing that we experience, whether we're conscious of it or not, even in utero, every single thing that we experience in our whole life has as a part of it an emotional piece.
Yes.
You cannot have an experience in life that does not have some stimulation of the interoceptive nerves, the nerves that have to do with somatic bodily feeling and emotions, how you feel about that bodily feeling, for example. And so conjuring up a memory always conjures up the emotion that was a part of it. And that interoceptive system has 250 million nerve endings in our body, in the fascia, in our body. And so it's 7-to-1 interoceptive nerves to proprioceptive or motion kinds of, or vestibular or other kinds of sensory nerves. So there's a preponderance of this information that's available to us. Sometimes when we're working with patients, they'll automatically start to move. It's like they don't recognize that this is what's happening, and they can feel it happening, but they don't know what it is. They didn't make it happen, but all of a sudden it might just be an arm, or their head starts moving, or their whole body starts moving. And and they might kind of get freaked out by that, and you say, no, this is normal. This is energy that's being released from the body. So just go with it. Just allow it. And in the allowing, we as the therapist take gravity, maybe support the extremities or support the person as they're falling off the table. John Barnes maintains that what they're doing is reiterating the trauma, the moment of trauma. So if they fell out of a tree or spiraled in a car accident, or if they were traumatized physically, sexually, the screaming and the feeling of horror and terror that comes back, you have to let that go, get that out. It scares new therapists terribly. So they don't feel in control at all. Physical therapists say, I didn't get into CT for this. That's just not what I want.
Yep.
They don't recognize that this is as natural as crying, as tears. It's as natural as any of our functions. And there is what John Barnes does is insists that every person who learns the Barnes myofascial release takes unwinding as the very second course that you learn, or second or third if you took fascial pelvis, because you have to have a sense inside yourself what's happening with your patients so that you don't get freaked out. There are people who are really quite frightened by it in the beginning, but in the final analysis, anybody who's ever done this work for any period of time and done it soulfully, that means that they've dropped down and they've connected, they've resonated with the person, not just doing structural manipulation. That's not myofascial release as Barnes teaches it. It's a resonant connection with my energy and the other person's energy, allowing fascia to unwind and find its way home. And in that process of fascia unwinding and finding its way home, we're simply adding energy to the mix. We're not telling fascia what to do. We're supporting and allowing fascia to find its way home. And in that process, energy is released. That's what's released. The collagen isn't released. Elastin isn't released. The extracellular matrix isn't released. Energy is released. And we have, Richard Hardy has a marvelous video, a thermography video on YouTube, myofascial release thermography. And you can see the heat being released under his hands. I mean, and heat is energy being released. So then some people say, oh, there's no energy being released. Well, all you have to do is show them this picture, this video. So we get a lot of blowback from other manual therapists who say, that's a bunch of hogwash.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can seem quite intense, right?
Heard that one before.
Speaking from my own personal experience, right? The important thing to recognize as well as you're listening is that you're not injured in that process either.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
You can stop what's going on at any time.
Anytime you want to, you can stop it.
Yeah. But my first experience as a therapist observing myofascial release, I was actually a student, and it was my final clinical placement. And I have no concept of what I'm about to experience. Just I was encouraged to watch a couple of videos before going in. I don't know what the heck this is. And you know how time does that weird distortion when something important happens?
Yeah.
I'm standing there in the room, and my clinical instructor is, like you were describing earlier, putting his hands on the client and observing what the body is communicating it feels like it needs. And what felt like seconds later, he's pivoting with his shoulders and head on the table. Both of his legs are up in the air. My clinical instructor is holding him up with one hand, and he's grunting and sweating profusely. And it's, what's going on? Right? And then suddenly time does that weird thing again, and the appointment is over. And he was just thanking him. He was so grateful. He's hugging him. He's like, clearly it didn't hurt, at least not the kind of hurt he'd be mad about it afterwards. Right. It was a necessary for him to feel what he needed to get through that. But that moment was like, I have no idea what I just saw, but I have to understand this.
Yes. Yeah. I have to understand it. Right. And we're still working on that. I mean, Sue Hitzman and I are presenting at the International Fascial Research Congress in August a session on unwinding, and it's following the Barnes principles of unwinding. It's what does the research say about it, and what's the proof, the scientific proof of what's going on. There's no camera inside of us recording what's happening. We can only see what's going on the outside and hear what the patient has to say about it and what it felt like, but from the therapist and the patient's perspective. Sue has a video that she will show as a part of the presentation. She has a podcast too, and she interviewed John Barnes about unwinding and listened to what he had to say about it. So he really is the founder and the developer of these principles that finally people are paying more serious attention to.
Absolutely. We have a few more minutes before we wrap up, Carol. I wonder if you could share one thing, just one thing about fascia that could change the way people think about their body and health. If you could maybe even just sum up some of the things we've already said, because I feel like if they haven't had a bit of a mindset shift in this episode already, what would that be? What is one thing you could say about fascia?
Fascia will always take care of us. It is our support. And it is fueled by an energy that is at its essence love. We can get into all kinds of bad places from misuse of our body through sports, through athletics, overuse, poor nutrition, not drinking enough water, being dehydrated. Fascia will still be in there trying to help us, trying to support us, trying to keep us going. It's a friend. It is a friend for life, and it really will support us. And the least we can do is ask it what it needs, and then listen. I was doing I woke up this morning and I turned in bed and I had a twinge, that twinge you get in the SI joint or the L4, L5, S1 area. And I lay back down and I did my pelvic tilts. And then I got up and I got my wedges.
Yes.
And I immediately put wedges in to correct my pelvis. This is where we started out today, to correct my pelvis, because I looked in the mirror and sure enough, it wasn't a right anterior rotation. It was a left anterior rotation. So I got the pelvis pelvic wedges under me. And then after I pulled them out, 10 minutes later, I did my pelvic tilts and my bridging and my hip exercises that I give my patients. And so far, it's gone. Amazing. But fascia gave me a clue, gave me a hint. Carol, I need you to take care of me today. And you can ignore this if you want to, but watch what happens, because I can real easily send a spasm right up the side of your back, and you'll be on your back for 3 days trying to get that one out.
Yeah, and that's just it, is the listening. That's the biggest piece, I feel. So many of us are so good at ignoring.
Yes.
Ignoring.
Yeah.
Yes. And if people are local to you, tell us, please, what area you are practicing in and how they can reach you.
Okay, I'm in Scarborough, Maine, which is south of Portland, just 10 minutes south of Portland, Maine. And Melissa Roop has a practice in Saco, another 20 minutes south, down toward Massachusetts. And Melissa treats me every week. And then when she has a especially interesting patient, she asks if I come in and help treat with her. And then I run the study groups, the Southern Maine study groups. But I don't have a practice out of my home anymore or in a clinic per se. I'm really just consulting and co-treating with other people.
Okay, wonderful. And if you could share a little, what is the research that you're working on now?
Well, I have a book called Integrative Therapies and Rehabilitation. It's got 4 editions out. It's all kinds of therapies that are based in holism, on subtle energy based. And Barnes has a chapter in there. It's been published in 4 editions. That's the book that John said, "What are you doing, Carol, to move science forward in the next century?" And the publisher has asked me to renew, to revise to the 5th edition. So I'm in the process with 19 of my co-authors, writing up the latest research in holistic therapies for a textbook available for rehabilitation professionals, so they can see the power of fascia-based therapies. All of the therapies in there, whether it's yoga or Pilates or Reiki or myofascial release or massage or Rolfing or even subtle energy, microcurrent, and acupuncture. All of them are working through the fascia, and all of them are counting on subtle energy as the function of electrons and photons and protons to bring about the changes that we're looking for at the cellular level for health and balance. So that's keeping me pretty busy right now.
It sounds like it.
Anyway, Carol, thank you so much for your time today, speaking with us and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. We appreciate you so much for being here.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
If you want to learn more about myofascial release and learn more about us, you can head to our website, dropintohealing.com. And you can find us on social media at Myofascial Canada on all of the social channels. If you head to Spotify, you will find a replay of this episode, The Fascia Fix, and you can find the information for our guests and any of the other information that we share on these episodes in the links in the description.
You've been listening to The Fascia Fix with Nellen and Justin Krull. If you want to be a guest on the show or have a topic or feedback, DM us at myofascial Canada on Instagram or TikTok. Thanks for listening.